Have you ever thought about why Empire, which so far is not even a series, is so beloved by the fans? How it's made such an imprint on the minds of its players, despite so clearly not reaching its potential? Why Napoleon is still living on, especially through multiplayer mods like Napoleonic 3? Why the fall of the Samurai expansion for Shogun 2 is so absolutely legendary? And finally, why the Warhammer series can be so much fun to play, even though the fantasy aspects aren't your favorite cup of tea? Well, in my opinion, it all comes down to the simple concept of gunpowder, and how this smoky afterbirth completely transforms every battlefield it dares to cover itself in. If you find this topic as interesting as I do, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video if you want to see more. It really helps me out. In 2009, Empire Total War would change the face of Total War in several ways, not least of all in terms of the introduction of gunpowder. Taking place in the 18th century, gunpowder is the single most important factor in explaining why the battles of Empire feel so different compared to the prior games. There's just something special about lining up that rifle infantry and seeing the fire and smoke shoot out of those phallic-shaped cylinders, or when cannonballs emerge from even larger cylinders. Despite the bugs and the weird combat, the gunfire carried these battles and continue to do so to this very day. And the exact same goes for the game that largely perfected what Empire did, namely Napoleon. Despite being narrower, Napoleon's battles just look so awesome and beautiful even 13 years after release. And even though there were less diversity in units and armies, the game keeps on being loved even now, in part by the multiplayer community that lives on. Now here's an interesting one. Shogun 2 is one of the most beloved and universally acclaimed Total War games of all time, and yet, its last expansion, Fall of the Samurai, is by many considered to be even better. And the reason? Creative Assembly made the absolute genius, galaxy-brain decision of setting it during the mid-19th century, completely transforming the entire game. The foundation is certainly there, with medieval Japan on its last legs through the power of the samurai. But what arrived added so much more. Gunpowder, guns, and cannons brought a completely new dynamism and a sense of grandness to Shogun 2. Somehow, the addition of line infantry allowed the old melee units to seem more special, and to be used in different ways, creating a game not really seen in historical Total War ever since. Of course, for the past 7 years, Total War has taken the series into a markedly different direction, but some major similarities remain. Even though Warhammer can be understood as a fantasy-first game, it's actually quite clear that Warhammer, at least when playing its more human-like factions, have taken a lot of gameplay inspiration from exactly Shogun 2 Fall of the Samurai. Take the Empire for example. Just like Fall of the Samurai, the Empire combines gunpowder up and down its ranks with regular melee infantry and powerful cavalry. Cathay does the same, and so does Kislev. And together, we have just a few examples of why I personally find these factions so much more fun to play than the rest. Specifically because they combine that old school down and dirty fighting with the booms and bangs of gunpowder, making for battlefields that in my opinion are so much more fun than the ones drenched in magical lights. Now I love the classic mano-a-mano melee cafe fighting as much as the next guy, but I can't deny that there's just something extra added when gunpowder enters the room. Take even Medieval 2, which becomes even better when you remember that that game actually also depicted the later medieval era, partially doing so by introducing gunpowder in the late game. This actually gave us a taste of that Fall of the Samurai goodness, having cannons completely invalidate thick city walls, and muskets cut through plate armor like it was nothing. In essence, what I'm trying to convey here is that Creative Assembly really should think about utilizing gunpowder more, instead of making subpar medieval games like they did with Thrones, or joke around with something in between myth and reality as they did at first with Troy, before they admittedly fixed it with Mythos. I think the next Total War saga, or the next Total War game overall, would absolutely benefit from taking place during an age where gunpowder is a factor. Just imagine a focused Total War title set during the Italian Wars, where the exact transition between medieval and early modern warfare, with guns and cannons, takes shape. Or perhaps a title set during the 30 Years' War, where a very special type of warfare, namely pike and shot, sees the light of day. But really, any theater or war which includes gunpowder could make it work, as long as the dynamism remains present. Guns and cannons did not solve every problem of its carriers, which is why it took the colonizers so long, after all, to drive the Native Americans ever west, despite the clear technological superiority of the Europeans. This is partially why the Empire Total War expansion Warband failed. It didn't truly manage to capture the style of warfare of the First Nations, who used their knowledge of the land and their accuracy and skill with the weapons they knew to their full advantage. That's why I ironically believe that a saga title set in something like the time period of Warband, or even slightly earlier or later, could actually be the ideal Total War title. I mean, just imagine it. A total war with several warring European powers, all fighting for control of this vast new land. They all bring new tech to the battlefield. Guns, cannons, and the pursuit of ever better weapons. In their lust for land and wealth, they end up fighting each other for control. Meanwhile, in this iteration of Warband, the Native American tribes would be depicted much more accurately, not just in terms of their numbers and sizes, but also diplomatically. Some fighting each other, some working with the Europeans, and others still pushing to drive the Europeans out. Their use of classic weapons would be so much more fun if Creative Assembly could bring an important change to how these battles were fought. Because while the Europeans would rely on line infantry and regular marching, the First Nations would use guerrilla tactics, being much freer, perhaps being much more prone to ambushes or taking the enemy off guard. Of course, the natives themselves came to pick up and make use of European weapons themselves, and so I think another Warband title could become the ultimate in transition period Total War, combining that sense of old and new intertwined. But no matter the time period or setting, and even though I personally have a unique love for the more analog ancient and medieval gunpowder-free eras, there's certainly something uniquely alluring and special about the gunpowder eras. Forget not also the fact that gunpowder brings with it innovations elsewhere. I've never truly been a fan of the melee naval battles of Total War, but the gunpowder battles, with massive capital ships and loud cannon fire, offer some of the most awesome sights and sounds in any strategy game. Whether the Age of Sail and the beauty of the more civilized Napoleon naval battles, or the more explosive and modern Fall of the Samurai skirmishes, the idea of having floating fortresses spitting fire at each other is an awesome one, and would be a unique feature in any game set during time periods spoken of in this video. The medieval and early modern carracks would for example be important in the earlier periods, while in the Warband example, navies would be vital to secure overseas trade lanes, or keep in contact with the mainland back in Europe. No matter the Total War, or whether we're talking history or fantasy, the use of gunpowder has, in my opinion, only ever served to elevate the Total War battles, and the overall experience, as I feel they more often than not enable a battlefield and a campaign which appears so much more dynamic than those without. That does not mean earlier time periods aren't awesome in their own right, not at all, but there's something about gunpowder itself which seems to force Creative Assembly into interesting and changing time periods where the old meets the new. And whether we're talking a Medieval 3, which includes that late era introduction of gunpowder, or a completely new take on the Empire Total War Warband expansion, or indeed a completely new and massive empire to itself, I would love to see gunpowder be used in one way or another. Because if there's anything modern Total War has proved, it's that you can't go wrong if you always go out with a bang. Cheers.